Hello and welcome back to Apolla's Odyssey. I am here with my good friend Brad Olsen. We have known each other for a while now, been at several conferences together, and he is actually doing a little kind of tour around, getting blurbs on his new book that's coming out. So he has a lot of interesting things to talk about, but we're going to get into the book later. But first, I've seen a lot of awesome presentations that you've done on the giants, and if you don't know this, Brad has the best research out there on the giants. Like, his presentations are amazing. If you haven't seen him, he's pretty much part giant himself. So
Tall Nordic.
Yes. So what got you into giants and your research on that subject?
It's kind of a roundabout way, but basically it's through my travels around the world, most especially when I was working on a book called Sacred Places North America. And in that book, I was traveling across country 4 times and going to all the earthen mounds. And another thing about you and I, Apolla, is we're both from Illinois. And as you know, the culture around the building the mounds is pretty much in our home territory. You have the effigy mounds up in Wisconsin. You have the step mounds like Cahokia.
Just in southern Illinois.
Yeah, just outside of St. Louis. At one time, St. Louis was nicknamed Mound City because there were just so many near the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri River. Almost all of them have now been leveled for just development and for developing the farmers' fields. There was just no protection for them in the 18th or 19th century and most of the 20th century too. So it was just looting. If you were digging up anything of value, you could take it. But as I was going around and discovering many of these mound sites, starts with the Adena and then the Hopewell culture and then the mound builders and the effigy builders. I remember as a little kid, I was going to Devil's Lake in Wisconsin, and there were effigies right there, including one, a very famous one, of a man with bird wings. And in fact, there was even a burial inside that effigy mound. So just from the time I was a little kid and going around to these sites and researching this book, Sacred Place North America, coming across all this information about massive human-like, but not quite humans. They were sometimes different. Of course, being much, much taller than we are on average, but also sometimes having double rows of teeth, an extra digit on the hand and toes, and sometimes they were even mummified with red hair. They were gingers too.
I was just going to mention the red hair. You know, it's interesting. I actually did an interview at Coba with my travel guide in Coba, Mexico, and he brought up the elongated skull beings with red hair. But are you saying, were these giants elongated skulls beings, or were they they were just giants?
Well, they were just giants. And as far as the North America ones, I'm not sure if they were elongated, but I've just come back from South America last year, as well as Antarctica, and there are museums in South America, in Peru and Bolivia, where elongated skulls have been discovered, some of which have red hair. And when the cranium capacity, that is the cavity that contains the brain, is 30% larger than our own, you would tend to think that the body would go along with the size. And in fact, we saw some mummified elongated skull skeletons in Peru. And the head was as big as the torso on an adolescent child that had been ritually killed in the Sacred Valley of Peru and buried with nobility and the royalty. So it was obviously considered a very high-ranking person, but it was killed because there's a big hole in the back of the head where it was struck very hard and killed, but buried with the kings and queens of the Incan.
Do you believe that these different species, the giants in North America and the elongated skull beings in South America, were they around the same time? Were they alive around the same time, or do you think these were from different eras? Is there any way they could possibly be interrelated? What are your thoughts on that?
So much of our ancient history is being redated older and older and older, with some of these skeletons being found in the most unusual places when miners are deep in a shaft and coming across these bones, opening it up, sometimes lifting up the bones, and they just turn to dust. They're so old. In my book, Modern Esoteric, I have other examples of out-of-place artifacts, as well as the giants in the chapter on human origins in my new book, Beyond Esoteric, because this is just a part of our history that so few people are aware of, but definitely deserves attention. And to answer your question, I think they're much, much older. I think they're different than we are today. Now, people have actually gotten a little bit shorter, especially men. A lot of people don't know this, and I often tell this to other fellow tall guys, that in the time of, say, the Celtics, who had red hair, they were real tall, even taller than me. I mean, sometimes average height around 7 foot. And they were also Rh negative blood type, which harkens all the way back to Atlantis and antediluvian civilizations. Now, what Rh negative means is just no trace of monkey blood, because Rh stands for rhesus monkey. So if we're all descended from the apes, as Darwin would have us to believe, we should all be Rh positive. But in my family, we're not. And so there are these real quirky things about Rh negative people. One, for example, and this happened in my own family, my grandmother was Rh negative. She married a man, my grandfather, who is Rh positive. My dad was born Rh negative, no problem. The second baby was Rh positive and was tainted with my grandmother's blood and died. He was called what was then known as a blue baby because he just turned blue. All of his antibodies, my Uncle Douglas, were fighting off the blood of my grandmother. So this is what makes it so unique. Only humans have that trait. Only humans can have blood that can kill their own offspring. No other animal has that. As well as occasionally an extra rib, an extra vertebrae, and generally Rh negative people are more psychic and have perceptions of things. So it does appear that there are two kinds of humans that live in the world today. And I would even go one step further and say that some of these regressive genes may also harken back to the giants. And just like you can sometimes see someone that looks like a Neanderthal, well, that too is something that goes through generational lines. So even though I'm Rh positive, it is in my family, just like my blue eyes. I could have a green-eyed child like my grandmother or an Rh negative kid. So it does stay within our DNA, and I do believe it's part of my genetic makeup as well.
And I'm also Rh negative as well.
I didn't know that. Wow, okay.
But yeah. Woo. So what do you think about the giants then? Where did the giants come from if they don't have the rhesus monkey factor? Then are they aliens?
Well, good question. I don't particularly know if they were or were not Rh negative. I'm just saying that 15% of humans right now are. Probably they were, but it's kind of hard to tell. Were they aliens? That's another good question.
So the people descended from the ancient alien bloodline could be completely different than the giants or the elongated skulls. They're all completely different races, you're saying?
I'm saying that they are quite different. There may have been some interbreeding, just like Rh negative and positive can still mate and have children, although once in a while the blood will mix and there will be a problem. But with the giants, they were often at odds with the Native Americans. And there are actually some legends that have passed down through generations that were then recorded. One of the most famous that I was researching when I did Sacred Places North America is a book by Sarah Winnemucca, who is a Paiute Indian. In fact, her book is called My Life with the Paiutes. And she described the giants as being adversaries to the Paiutes, who were much more populated in numbers and were fighting with the giants. In fact, the giants were actually cannibals and would eat the Paiutes. They wouldn't eat their own. So technically, if they were a different species, it wouldn't be cannibalism. But in Sarah Winnemucca's book, My Life with the Paiutes, she said there was a big battle with them and they retreated to the Lovelock Cave, which is just outside of the town of Lovelock, Nevada. And I've been there and explored the cave and went to the museum and even the Winnemucca Museum looking for artifacts of the giants, but they're all gone. So unfortunately, they don't want this information out. But nonetheless, it has passed down through legend. The giants were all killed in a battle in Lovelock Cave. Lo and behold, that book was written in the 19th century. Much later in the 1930s, there were miners that were digging out bat guano. They were using it for fertilizer. What happened? They came across 7, 8, 9 foot mummified giants who were buried with grave items, much like the Egyptians were. And lo and behold, they had red hair. They were very well preserved, very, very tall, much, much taller than the Paiutes. And this is a theme that continues around the world. It's also known that when Easter Island was originally discovered by the Dutch on Easter Sunday, they made note that there were 2 races of people living on the island. One were very, very tall with elongated ears and were more white in complexion, where the other class were Polynesians and much shorter and darker skin, and they were the subservient ones. Well, the Dutch made a very fatal mistake of leaving behind firearm and cannon, which then were acquired by the more numerous Polynesian. By the time Captain Cook came around to Easter Island 2 decades later, all the long-eared, all the tall whites were all wiped out. All the Moai statues were toppled over, and there had been a civil war where the smaller Polynesians had won because they had acquired the weapons of the Western people. So once again, the talls, lesser in number, if somehow an advantage was given to their adversaries, were usually on the short end of the stick there. That's why I think there's so few that could be left, but maybe little genetic tracers here and there.
I mean, that even happens in the legend of like David and Goliath in the Bible. Do you think that comes from a real story?
It's so interesting because so many times stories out of the Bible or Greek mythology and legend will often come true. For example, the legend of the Trojan horse and Troy was often thought to just be a legend until the archaeologist Schielman went and discovered it and found it in Turkey. Now we know that Troy was a real place, and most likely this whole legend of a Trojan horse to take over the city is true. So I often give more credibility to some of these stories than we let on. And in the Bible, it also says in Genesis that there were these men of renown that mated with earth women, and they were very much here as overseers, as rulers, and through time had been deposed. So now it's mostly us puny humans who run the show on the surface.
And you mentioned, you were talking about a little about the Midwest earlier in giants. I've heard a little bit about the wars in Ohio. Apparently, there's been giants found there with armor on them and in a stasis. What do you know about that?
I'm not sure I know where that's located. I've heard those stories. I've been to other locations where skeletons and armor have been found. If you ask any historian or archaeologist in North America if Native Americans were able to use smeltering and the melting of two or more metals to create a stronger metal, they'll tell you no. But there have been skeletons and armor found all across North America. So either they're showing up on our shores in very long time ago in antiquity, wearing their armor, or they had a way to do it. Now, there's a place in Ohio called Fort Ancient where they actually found some of the furnaces where they were creating alloy that was much stronger. So keep in mind that according to Homer, we went from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age during the time of Homer. Bronze, of course, being an amalgamation of copper and tin to create a stronger alloy. If you were in battle and you had a bronze sword against a copper sword, I don't care how big or strong your opponent is, you're going to beat him because you're just going to slice his weapon in half as soon as you have a duel. So having the technology to create then steel, and now we live in the Iron Age, which is the strongest amalgamation you can have, you have a huge advantage. I love that book by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel, how the small European nations were able to go on and conquer the world just because they had immunity to germs, they had the invention of guns, and they could use steel. Very, very few peoples around the world could stand up to that, even if they were much more numerical in numbers and were braver, because you could just shoot them all down. And that's why we've generally gotten shorter in the world. Many of the big, tall Celts and Scandinavians, ever since the advent of guns and gunpowder, most especially, and then machine guns, which were debuted in the 19th century in the Crimean Wars, tall guys were the first ones to get picked off. So if you're not surviving World War I, and just the little guys who didn't get killed come back and have the kids, well, then those offspring are going to be much shorter. So we've basically gotten smaller in stature because of all the wars in the last 200 years.
Wow, this is very interesting. I never thought about it like that before. So I want to relate this to your journey through South America and then eventually to Antarctica. So what did you found along the way? You found the elongated skull beings. What did you find in Argentina, and what was your whole mission for the Antarctica journey?
Yeah, I was able to buy a SUV that was already outfitted in the back with a bed, with a cooler, with an extra battery. I mean, it was everything I needed to do this trip. And to drive through 5 South American countries. First stop was going from Chile to Peru and Bolivia. That was more of the archaeological as well as the elongated skull portion of the tour. But when I was going through Argentina, the goal was to look into some of these stories about the Nazis escaping after World War II. And I was quite amazed with what I found. There are several locations, and these are all highlighted in the History Channel show called Hunting Hitler, where you would think you're in a barbarian town. You would think that everybody around you would be speaking German, but they speak Spanish there. There's kind of a funny joke in Argentina because almost all the Native American people have been wiped out. There's only about 1% of native Argentinian and Chileans that are left. Of course, they all speak Spanish now, and the Germans are the wealthiest of the South Americans by far, and you can tell when you go to some of these German towns.
And there's a lot of Germans
And there are a lot of Germans, but by number, most of the Europeans are Italian and Greek. So the joke is, well, who are Argentinians today? And the joke is, well, they're Italians who wish they were as rich as the Germans and speak Spanish. And that's who they are. And they're tall and they're white. And unlike the very indigenous people of Peru and Bolivia, in Chile and Argentina, it's just like we could walk out tonight and go out to a restaurant in Los Angeles here and nobody would really bat an eye. We would just kind of blend in with everyone else. So that was kind of refreshing to just sort of not be so obviously a tourist all the time and to get around. But Argentinian peso has been greatly devalued, and not many people were traveling or even on the road, especially now during COVID. But 2 years ago, it was a whole different story. The Chileans are the wealthiest of the South Americans because they have all these big mines around there. And I didn't know it till I was there, but everybody around them resents them. Argentina doesn't like them because they supported the Brits during the Falkland Wars. The Bolivians don't like them because they took over the northern part of Chile in a war in the 19th century that cut off Bolivia's access to the coast. And Peru doesn't like them just because they're really rich and sort of push their money around. So these are the kind of quirky little things you pick up when you travel and go somewhere. And I started my career as an author by doing travel books, by doing these sacred places guides and other books. And I realized that there's so many untold stories around the world. And so that's what got me into the megalithic building constructions, to where the giants were found, to all these mysteries that are often associated with these sacred places around the world. And I created several book series around them because there's so many mysteries and so much to tell. And that's why I really like interviews like this, where we have an opportunity to get into the weeds a little bit and talk about some of the details.
And your books are very informative. I've read them. It's actually funny. I was reading a book that I found at Barnes & Noble's right before I met you. And then when I met you at Contact in the Desert 6-7 years ago, I walked by your booth and I was like, wait, you wrote this? I'm reading this right now.
Are you that guy?
Yeah, I said, are you that guy? That's funny.
That's me. That guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. A lot of people, even some of my friends in the conference scene, they'll have read my book prior to meeting me, and then when they finally do meet me, they have a lot to know, and that's great, and we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, definitely very informative. So, what is your new book on, and when exactly is that coming out? Can you give us a little overview on it?
Sure. It's called Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet, and it's the third and final in the Esoteric Series. I use the name Beyond Esoteric because I get into a lot of subjects that no 19th century esoteric researcher or someone who studied this stuff would have any idea what we're getting into here in the 21st century. A good example is in the Ubermind chapter. I go into technology leap and cosmic awareness and new abilities that humans are finding themselves being able to come into. In the embargo, I get into suppressed human origins, as we talked about with the giants. The embargo on truth with UFOs, with the whole notion that there may even be predatory species on this planet, such as these reptilians that live underground. You know, often we're told, look to the skies. That's where extraterrestrials come from. But never do we think that right here on this planet, there could be inner terrestrials. And we also have to keep in mind that they may have abilities that are far beyond our own comprehension. That is, being able to phase in and out of dimensions. That would make them ultra-terrestrials. So a new kind of classification in the world of exopolitics that helps us understand what we're dealing with here. Because we could be victim to some of these abductions we've heard so much about, or people that we know in conferences that are super soldiers or have worked in the secret space program that go off planet, sometimes never to return. There's a lot that we need to know about what we're up against, as well as this whole new age that we're entering of transhumanism. And the other section in Beyond Esoteric is called neo-fascism. And we're seeing that today with the moneyed elite that now control corporations, which have hijacked this country in many different ways, but starting back with the Act of 1871, when this country was made a corporation. And that's why our names are in caps on our driver's license, our social security card, our birth certificate, because we're chattel to them. We're just collateral that is traded on Wall Street. So these are esoteric subjects because people don't know much about them. So I stick with the facts. I give a lot of references. I want people to do their own research as well. I'll give you a lot of material, and I want you to think about this, but I also want you to have an open mind and understand this material as how it can make you a better person, how you can be more informed, how you can really understand our role here on this planet at this most incredible period. And I do believe we're going through what has been called a Great Awakening, that we could be in store for a transcendence, perhaps even up to fifth dimensional consciousness. And to do that in Beyond Esoteric, we have to be the best human beings we can be. That is, always truthful and always transparent in what we do, to be the very best human beings we could possibly be. I think it would help to meditate and also to look within as much as we can, to be just a good human being.
And do you think this fifth dimensional consciousness we're moving to, do you think that will involve extraterrestrial life being more common? And will that also include full disclosure?
That is something we're all hoping to see in our lifetime. And if you kind of look at the perspective of a benevolent ET that comes from a very advanced race, that may even be an ultra-terrestrial, almost incomprehensible how powerful these entities could be. And if you put yourself in their perspective and look at what we're doing to the earth and what we're doing to each other, and that there's still starvation on this planet, there's still warfare that's killing off large numbers of people, what we're doing to the planet and the animals. This is like the Planet of the Apes down here. It's really up to us humans to get our act together before we could sit at the table with these higher dimensional beings and be on an even level with them. And right now, I don't think that they want to get involved in such a way that they're going to be our babysitters. So if they land on the White House lawn and demand, hey, we're here, take us to your leader, well, then we're going to say, oh, all our problems are going to be solved by the extraterrestrials and we don't have to do it ourselves. That's not the way they wanted to do it. We have to clean up our act first.
You know, I've been doing a lot of interviews lately and with a wide variety of people, and they have all told me the same thing. It seems everyone's on the same page with this, so this is very interesting. Is there anything else you want to say about your book? I know I cut in there a little bit. I don't know
that's okay. Well, I appreciate hearing that, Apolla, because I call that the connecting data points. And when we talk about extraterrestrial matters or things that are rather confounding or not told to us by our government, by our school system, by politicians, by the media, we have to take it upon ourselves to research this material and come to conclusions. And I found the best way to do it, and how I assemble my material in my books, is to collect data points. And when you find the data points that match, that's oftentimes what is the truth. So that's a great observation on your part. So that's why the most esoteric of all technologies that we have been transferred to from the aliens is the yellow cube. And of course, it is explained in detail in Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet. And that's the subtitle of this book, because I really want to give people the ammunition for they themselves to know their own karmic journey that they're on and have the ability to be the best human being they can and make this ascension in the Great Awakening.
Wow, I have so many questions about this technology, but I guess I should save it and save it for the viewers so that they can read the book and find out for themselves. And I am definitely excited to read that book myself.
It's just gone to the printer this week, and it will be available for Christmas presents in 2020. So it will be out in about 5 weeks.
Awesome.
So
and that will be what stores? Like Amazon?
Oh, nationwide, yeah.
I know I got your book at Barnes & Noble's before. The New Age section is usually my go-to there.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, it was great having you here with us today on Apolla's Odyssey, and I am excited to check out your book.
Thank you, Apolla. It's great to be here. I certainly invite your viewers to check out Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet, Book 3 in the Esoteric Series.